Different projects. I've been getting very much into uh, this AI generated video. So
You've been getting into it because you've been
just
generating.
yeah, generating a bunch of little videos and stuff uh,
That's
uh,
fun.
for promotional, wanting to do promotional videos for the empathy, you know, for the empathy circle and so
Yeah,
forth.
that's great. Have you seen any of those AI generated stuff of like Donald Trump in the Gaza Strip? It's
No, there's so many. Yeah, baby
awful.
Trump, all that. Yeah,
Yeah, there's some really terrifying things on the internet these days.
it's crazy. Yeah.
How was the summit or it wasn't the summit, but it was a conference.
Yeah, that went well. I gave 30-minute presentation on the definition, and I've been, oh, yeah, kind of more on our topic. I've been working on the the uh, cognitive, affective, concern model. Really studying, going through AI, getting quotes, just really trying to. I went through all the different search engines, and you can see it's on our website. Just asking, uh, about that model to really understand it and to break it down. So to break down the cognitive part, what are people really meaning by cognitive empathy? What do they mean by affective empathy? And then trying to and then start addressing, each aspect because, and I'm really seeing, it's such a mess. I mean, it is just,
It is.
it's just, it's a, yeah, it's a Tower of Babel, and I think the whole thing needs to be scrapped.
Mhm.
I think what we're doing is really needed. And so, yeah, I'm glad would love to talk more about it. I did the presentation. There, they didn't make a separate video of it, and then they also didn't record. They had a big, if you don't close your windows, of your audience windows, then that comes onto the recording. So it wasn't very good recording that they
Oh,
made
that's
of
too
that
bad.
presentation. So I'm thinking of maybe doing it again. Maybe we could even do it together sometime
Yeah,
and record the
that's the
whole
great
thing.
thing about you recording everything that we say to each
Yeah.
other is we know that you're going to be recording. So, yeah, I think that's great. And did
Well,
you
we
have
had
a
a
Q&A?
we had a pretty good meeting one time. We had a good start going, and one person joined in, and then the whole recording. She had an issue with the recording, and so the whole recording of that meeting could not be used.
Oh, darn it.
So we gotta be careful with that, Also, always announcing it.
Yeah.
Things
Yeah.
like this. People were very touchy around that.
Yeah, that's fair. And did you have like a Q&A session after your
There
presentation?
was no Q&A. That was there was various different presentations, and it was really interesting. I don't know if had talked to you since about that Kevin Waltman, who wrote his article in the Chicago
Oh, yeah.
Times. He's talking about radical empathy, and he was critical of it. And I hadn't even heard much about radical empathy in terms of as sort of a gateway to woke philosophy. And somebody there at the conference actually gave a talk on it, and it was all about that. And
Hmm.
I did reach out to her. I want to have a dialogue about it because they're sort of I became more aware of this split, from sort of a pure empathy, approach, which is just, everybody being heard, kind of like what you see in the empathy circles versus seeing victim, that empathy is a gateway to a victim perpetrator worldview,
Hmm.
right? Where I think real empathy doesn't see victims or perpetrators. It sees humans and tries to empathize with them, and tries to bring them together in empathic connection. And then also with the interview, I did an interview with the guy, Alan Rolfs, who's been doing active listening work since the 70s, early 70s. He started with Gene Gendlin, at University of Chicago, and has been involved with most of the teachers who have done uh, this active listening, empathic listening work. And he said even in the nonviolent communication community, I don't know if you're familiar with, he says there's that split too. There's a community kind of doing more what we're doing of, empathy is the core. It means listening to everyone, versus sort of people who are using empathy as sort of a gateway to woke activism,
Hmm.
which is sort of based on, again, people being victim perpetrator, and you got to fight the power, the social justice kind of. So it's an interesting split to kind of address.
Yeah,
That would
that's
be
really
something for
interesting.
the definition too. I think the definition that'd be another aspect of defining what empathy is, holistic empathy versus that sort of model. Yeah.
Yeah, the one-sided empathy. The thing that makes it so tricky is we're talking about something that is an ideal, right? Where we all empathize with all sides of things. But I think I wonder if what they're getting at is it's not common that people are able to do that. So they end up falling into the trap of victimization and like just really empathizing with who they see as the victim, because it's an easier version of empathy
Hmm.
than trying to listen to both sides.
I
So
would say it's not even empathizing with the victim. As soon as you turn them into a victim, you're turning it into sort of a sympathy, feeling sorry for someone. So
down.
you've kind of shifted from the empathic to more of a sympathetic, feeling sorry, which becomes sort of a self. Oh, I have to do something in the sense that I feel sorry for these people. So those are all things to kind of explore and be able to articulate, I
Hmm.
think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that they would have an issue with the kind of empathy that we're talking about. It's just maybe the less mature version of it. And I know I've mentioned this before. I think Edwin, you're much more mature than other people, than the rest of us. Daniel, maybe you are as well.
Well, I mean, what we're trying to do is become mature around this word, around what are we actually talking about, because and ultimately I see it a little bit as, I don't know if you're familiar with like the saying from Lao Tzu, the great Tao cannot be put into words.
Hmm.
Like every attempt to put it into words will make it dilute it more. And
Hmm.
so as people go at the word empathy, if you go at it from a mental point of view and only from a mental point of view, word kind of access to it, then you're missing, in my estimation, the real core of empathy, which is not in words. It's a we touched on that before. It's like a relationship to life that you choosing, an empathic relationship to life. And when you do that, you become like an open, how do I say that? Parachute, like, everything gets caught. You
Hmm.
can no longer say, oh, I only listen to these people because they're my people, and so they are not my people, so my empathy only goes to them. That's not empathy. Real empathy is, for me, more like this, what you call holistic empathy, that's spanning, but that to define that only through words is, I'm not sure if it's possible.
Yeah, and that brought a couple of things to mind. Um, One of the projects that I hope to do with the dance department at my university is do an empathic dance event where it's like a mirror dance and there's no words involved at all.
Mhm.
So if we're
Mhm.
just talking about words in
Mhm.
terms of what empathy is, we're missing something that's more primal and something that is more human to human, more emotional, right? So there are, I still do think that there are different versions of what empathy can be, because I have seen that happen where you can connect with a person, um like across a room, you make eye contact and there's a connection. There's no
Yes.
words exchanged. You can connect with somebody on stage when you're watching them perform or dance or play the piano. I have a strong connection. See, my piano's right here. That's I am
Me
a
too. Music.
Yeah, and I know we talked about that with your drum circles, right? Where there's an intense connection that I feel with the music, and by connecting with the music, I'm connecting with the person receiving, who's listening, or I'm also connecting with the person who wrote the music. And if I'm the person who wrote the music, I'm conveying something to the people who are going to play the music. And so it connects the composer, the instrument, the performers, the audience. We're all connected in that. And there's no words involved in that. Another thing that I think potentially makes um, intergroup empathy difficult is because we're not just talking about empathizing. It's not just about empathy. We also have to factor in the fact that there are group identities, and there's this within social psychology. We talk a lot about in group versus out group
Hmm. Hmm.
biases, right? We are just intensely biased toward people who are like us, and so
Hmm.
it's actually quite difficult to do the kind of empathy that we're talking about, where we're actually completely open to learning from both sides, because there's a threat avoidance that we get into, and we feel like we have to protect our own identity. And if somebody's attacking, if we view somebody else as attacking our identity or our group's identity, then our walls go up and empathy goes away, right? And so that's why I'm saying, Edwin, I think that you're a much more mature, emotionally intelligent human, because you're able to see past those group identities. But I think that most of us, and I'd like to think that I'm able to see past that as well. Um, but I think that that's just a human tendency, is to, and there's lots of research to back this up, that we have
Yes.
the tendency to give into those group identities and let go
Yes.
of empathy. Like we choose empathy for our group, and we choose not to empathize with people who are different because it's a threat. So it's challenging. It really is.
Yeah, I think you
Well,
can. Oh, it's
go
just
ahead,
that if
Eddie.
you could say that when you're young, children maybe have that mindset too, right? You say to begin with, so
Like we're all just the same. Is that what you're saying? Like,
yeah, that
yeah,
you could, you kind of you learn it's a block to empathy that,
yeah,
your tribe. So it's a block and it can be overcome. So it could become a social norm, it's so we have sort of
Well,
tribal, so I
I
think it's
think this
doable.
is, sorry, but this is so important. I mean, that is the core, I think, what we're talking about, that we're in the process, that we're not, that
did you
empathy
say
is
in the
nothing
process?
stat.
Sorry, I missed what you
Yeah,
said.
we are in the process. So
Okay.
I'm like, I can recognize the moments where I get triggered and I contract and I want to go with a certain person and push out with somebody else. I can start noticing that, me doing that. And then I can do what I hear you do, Edwin, all the time, is say, let's put this into a circle and talk about it,
Hmm.
and talk about it empathically. So where my moments are, where I fall on my face and I cannot respond empathically and I contract, that shouldn't be a failure. That should be more like, that's how I learn.
Hmm.
When I learn music, I cannot learn music without making mistakes. It's
Mhm.
impossible. In fact, the mistakes guide me to the way of making music. It's not possible. It's literally impossible to learn music without making mistakes. And the same thing I think is true for this living thing of empathy. It's a trajectory that we took. It's a directional thing. That's where we're going. And and as we develop a definition that, to me, feels like makes empathy more like this wholeness thing, like you say, holistic empathy that carries within sort of like a response protocol that I may fulfill, or sometimes I miss, but that doesn't matter. I'm moving in that direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're right that we do tend to choose. We choose empathy or we choose to contract. This past weekend, the reason I've been so unavailable is there was a a sports camp that we were putting on to help kids to improve their character, as well as notice that they don't have to choose between character development and performance development, because a lot of times we think that it's one or the other, where it's, you have to be win at all costs. You have to denigrate the other team. You have to it has to be winning is everything. But bringing it back into this context of what you're talking about with pulling people into an empathy circle, like if you're thinking about two different teams, they are on opposite sides of the volleyball net or opposite sides of the soccer field, right? They interact with each other, but it's in a very confrontational way, right? They are,
Right.
by nature of the game that they're in, they are opposite each other. And so in
Yes.
order for one to win, the other has to lose.
Yes.
And so the challenge with that, excuse me, is by getting into that milieu, it's automatic that there's a difference between my side and your side. So anytime we have identity on the line, so we put on jerseys, so we have our colors,
Right.
or this extends to politics. I'm on this side of the
Right.
aisle or on this side of the aisle,
That's right.
or I'm from this country or from this country. I'm from this religion or this religion. There are so many things that divide us, that it's so easy to choose that. It's so
Right.
easy to choose my team, right? And
Yes.
I don't think that that's necessarily bad to choose your team, because there's a lot of good that comes from team unity as well. And so if you are constantly going to the other side, like if you were to go to the other side of the net and actually spike it, on your team, you're actually harming your team by helping the other team. So in that context, you can't get into a metaphorical empathy circle, right? But I think what matters is noticing that when that context is gone, that's when we can still be friends with each other. We can still connect with each other on a much more fundamental level. It's not to say that you should let the other side win because you empathize with them so much that you should just stop trying to perform at your highest level. But one thing we talk a lot about in the sports literature, excuse me, I wish I had I do have something to drink. Hang on. In the sports and character development literature, something called contesting orientation, where you notice how do you view your opponent? Do you see them as somebody who needs to be vanquished? They need to be destroyed in order for you to get what you want? Or do you view it as we're in this together, we're partners, and I help you to be better and you help me to be better? And so, I think we can take that metaphor and apply it to all areas of life and just recognize there are different teams. And the fact that there are different teams actually can help us all to be better. Where if we didn't have right and left in politics, then we wouldn't have something to balance us out. So by empathizing with the other side, it doesn't mean that we're saying that their side is right and our side is wrong. We're saying that we're partners in this process. And adapting it to the empathy circle, if we are just empathizing and we're not being heard, that's not holistic empathy, right? And if we're just talking and we're not empathizing with the other, that's also lopsided. So we have to be partners in the process. And I think that's one of the mindset shifts that could really benefit society as well, is just noticing we're all in this together. We have common humanity. At the core, at the basis of all of us, we
Mhm.
are all part of the human race. And that's
Right.
what unites us. And we have divisions, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Those divisions can help us to be better and balance each other out.
So it's kind of like
Well,
the social structure.
mhm.
What is the structure that we're relating on? Is it are there competitive social structures, or are there more empathy based social structures? Um, so, for
Yeah.
example, there was finish with this that in terms of the family, there's that the work that I don't know if you've seen the parent effectiveness training book by Thomas Gordon.
Mhm.
So he's talking about this, right? In the family, typical is the parents win in the argument, so the kids win, So there's this competition of power that happens, and
Hmm.
that his thing is, well, use empathy, active listening to negotiate to come up with an approach where you don't have a winner and a loser. It's like you're kind of like uh, working through those kind of issues. So it's a no lose method. So, I mean, the social structure is a big,
Yeah, and
question.
I think
They're gonna,
we become better than we would be if we didn't have somebody who sees it differently from us.
Yeah. Well, I one of the things that occurs to me in the development of what we right now have in our political sphere is that, if you trace it back historically, um, then what you describe as the right and left balancing each other out, that came out of that whole political orientation, and the development of democracy came out of being solidly rooted in commons. That's
Hmm.
where we come from. Humans came from a world that was completely integrated. And so the human mind has done what we even now do, which is create more and more distinctions in its understanding of the world. But, it used to be that I heard these stories in my childhood that the politicians would go for drinks after they leave Congress, right? And then hash out what they're really going to do. They're enemies in Congress, but they're meeting in the Commons afterwards. That has eroded. That's no longer existing. And it's, to me, it's like a sign of the human mind, the divisive human mind, infringing itself more and more and more, not only on the social structure of humans, but all the way into nature. And Naomi Klein calls it end-time fascism. It's a form of fascism that doesn't even have a vision anymore. It's just destructive for
Hmm.
the sake of the people who are in power. And that's what we're seeing now. That's why it's so important to stand up to that. And what I hear when you say holistic empathy is that we bring back a conscious model of what the commons used to be, and say this is, if we competition is good, but only as long as it is in an overall environment of cooperation. If competition becomes the only doctrine, it leads to complete destruction. And because and so like that, let's say in the context of sports, I remember I watched like a documentary on basketball in New York before it became pro. It was all about local people having their people playing against each other, representing districts of New York City. And it was a cultural event. It was not just, and so they all understood, yes, of course we're here to beat the other guys. Of course, that's what we do. But when we lose, we still go to drinks with each other. Maybe we fight or so, but it is our fight of our city together. There is that wholeness. We're all New Yorkers, and we are competing here for who is the best team. But we identify we all are New Yorkers, and it was so different what happened right after when people got paid, and the whole sports got disconnected from the natural environment, from the city, from the groups. It all disappeared.
Hmm.
That whole culture. That's like for me this similar description for the wholeness to be deleted or be erased from consciousness, and all that's left is competition anymore. And who does it serve? It only serves the owners. It only serves a whole different agenda. It's no longer anything to do with the people. And we have the same issue right now in the world. It only serves this handful of people what's going on. And we have allowed that the common space has been eroded so much that we can't even agree on it anymore. So that's what I feel like bringing back with empathy, with the culture of empathy to me means a culture of wholeness that we propose for all voices. And it's sort of like a conscious bringing back of the commons.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm hearing from Jody, you think the competition is beneficial part? Is there something that
I mean, we can even look at it as, capitalism. Maybe this is a capitalism versus socialism philosophy, that maybe we don't want to get too deep into it. But in theory, if there's competition in a market, it makes the products from those multiple companies even better, right? Because they're competing to win the interests of their consumer, right? So competition isn't necessarily a bad thing. What I think is a bad thing is when we give in to the mindset that the other team, whatever that team is, needs to be destroyed. Like if we want to win at all costs, there's a quote that I found in the sports literature. It's when, let's see, how does it go exactly? When winning, I don't remember it exactly, dang it. But when winning is the only thing that matters, it's worth doing anything to win. And so that's where we have to be so careful with the competition, is that it's so easy to fall into that mindset. So I'm definitely not saying that I would take competition over commons. No. I think that the commons and the culture of empathy actually are better. But I'm also saying that competition is not inherently bad or destructive.
It depends in the context competition shows up in. So let's say there is a university that puts out a contest to all the students to say, we got a scientific problem that we need solving. And we have 5 groups, you all go at it. Or there was a huge project an actual project, an international project, who comes up with the best ocean cleaning plastic removal system. It was an X Prize with billions of dollars connected to it. And I think 7 teams, international teams, competed, and the Australian won a huge prize. And now they're building this extensive ocean cleanup project through their technology. Now that was good competition, but it was held in a context, so the competition was going somewhere, had meaning and directionality. When Microsoft bought up every little small software company on the way to their fame, that's not competition.
Right.
That is destruction.
Yeah, that's
destruction
that's exactly the difference. I think those 2 examples are perfect examples, because the first example had a higher purpose. There was something that was beyond just the competition itself, right? It was for the greater good of all of humanity, right? But then the Microsoft example, that is getting into that mentality of win at all costs. And the competition itself is what matters. So it's a matter of like what you're focusing on. If you're focusing on the trophy, or if you're focusing beyond the trophy. And if you're focusing on the trophy, that's when competition is a problem. But if the competition itself is for the greater good, that's when it's a positive thing. Edwin, what are your thoughts?
Competition is well positioned in an overall culture of cooperation, overall culture of you can take this as like cooperatives, worker-owned cooperatives that I studied, and we were deeply involved in trying to develop one. And so what the people have to go through to create a worker-owned cooperative is sort of like an internal cleansing of both the owner mindset and the employee mindset. Both of them don't work in the cooperative. And for people, that's a very hard process.
Hmm.
In general, for people, especially if they come from employment ideas, right? All of a sudden they have to take responsibility. That's very uncomfortable. And a lot of them really, really struggle with that. And when they come from ownership, to become one with everybody else and not have just the power to just to change, that's hard, right? So this process is super hard, but it's mainly hard because outside of the cooperative is only competition.
Hmm.
So they have to behave internally cooperative and externally competitive. And that's very difficult. It should be the other way around. Externally should be an all cooperative environment, which I think is what nature is. This is what the cosmos is. It's a big wholeness model that's not broken. It's held together by wholeness.
Hmm.
And in that, competition is a tool to develop, you know, then it makes perfect sense. And it dissolves sort of like the tension of competition always dissolves into like, you know, the kids come home after the game and
Yeah.
they get good food and everybody says, yeah, it's okay that you guys lost. And so, and the competition is gone and they can relax, you know. If the competition is their life, life or death, you know,
Yeah. And that if that's where your identity is placed,
yes,
if you only find that you have worth when you win, then like
Mr.
I said
Trump.
before, it's worth doing anything to win because you're worthless without that, right? You can get into that mindset. And the reason that I think that this is relevant to the conversation about empathy is talking about blocks to empathy. Because if we can view our okay, so first of all, step back. We are all part of the human race. So we all are connected. Um, but we also have to recognize that there are divisions, there are differences between us. And if we're focused on those differences rather than our similarities, and if we're focused on winning rather than something that's a higher purpose than winning, then there's no empathy. We won't allow
Right.
ourselves to get into a mode where we'll have holistic empathy. We'll have to find some way to divide us, right? And so it's a tricky balance between this view of the commons where we're all working together for the common good, and recognizing that because we live in different groups, different communities, different societies, we are going to have differences. It's inevitable because I mean, I don't understand all of the nuances of the cultural aspects of communities in, you know, in rural Africa. As much as I tried when I worked there was a language barrier and there was a history barrier. I didn't fully understand their history, so I didn't understand why their society worked the way that it did. And so as much as I tried and I had compassion, I had a lot of compassion. I really wanted to help people become the best versions of themselves. There still was an empathy barrier there because I couldn't communicate with them. And I honestly believe that no matter how hard I try, I will never fully understand where somebody else is coming from. And Edwin, I know that you've when I've said that before, it has seemed like you have not fully agreed with me when I've said that, and I would love to hear some more of your thoughts on that because my view of it is everything that I view in a relationship, in a conversation, it's always going to be filtered through my personal lens. And so that objective empathy, which is what I think we're all hoping to work toward, is actually impossible. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, in terms of the empathy circle, you know, you're sharing your thoughts right now, you know, sharing that you feel it's impossible to really understand, you know, someone else, and you're running it through your own personal filter. And it looks like you need to do something.
Sorry, just a second.
Sure, go ahead.
It's- Okay, sorry. My husband's gonna go pick up our twins from
Okay.
their little summer camp that they're doing.
So, I'm listening to you, and you're saying you feel it's impossible for you to know someone else, fully. You're always filtering it through your own experience, and that's why you feel you can't understand someone. But it's like now, I think when I listen to you, I think I understand your concern that you can't filter, that you filter things through your own view. And, so I can say, do you feel heard and understood? You know what I mean?
Yes, I do
So,
feel heard and
mhm,
understood, but to the extent that, I mean, it's always going to be, you're on that side of the screen, you're in
mhm,
California, your community is different from mine. You were on a different call than I was on right before this meeting. So what I'm bringing to this conversation is, I mean, my thought processes are all connected with the other events that I've been experiencing the last. So I mean, I'm bringing up sports examples, right? Because that's something that was, it was everything for the last month for me, was these sports examples. And so when I say something, it's surface level, right? But you don't see the experiences that I had with the kids at the sports camp, right?
but if
So
we spent enough time together, I'd get more. It's sort of a
yeah,
process, right?
and that's what I'm saying.
Empathy is a process of
Yeah.
sensing into, and it's kind of like never sort of ending. It's more the
Right.
process.
Yes. Oh, I
Yeah,
like that. I
yeah.
like that distinction, because if we
Totally.
think of it as a destination, like I've got it, I have
Yeah.
empathized, I can check that off of my list. It's not, that's not
No,
what it is,
no.
And
right?
it's
It's
how
Yeah.
we do the
That keeps it
process.
also fresh. It
Yeah.
keeps it very alive.
Mhm. Yeah, so we have to continue doing it throughout our lives, which,
From moment to moment too,
yeah,
right? It's a
Yeah.
moment to moment, and it's sort of how we do it. But am I saying, no, you're full of shit, you're this or that, judging you or trying to control you, or all the other things that block empathy? Or am I just trying to sense into who you are and what's sort of going on in your life, that process?
yeah, I think I understand more fully your approach to it. If I've understood, it's more of a, I know you've said this before, it's a way of being. And I don't think I fully understood before what you meant by that, but correct me if I'm wrong. Are you saying that it's more of a process
Hmm.
that it's the way you approach the conversation, that you're wanting to empathize, not that you're seeing it as I have empathized,
Right. Uh-huh.
right?
It's an ongoing process. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I like that.
Even Rogers talks about it. It's a moment to moment. It's like
Right.
it's already some
A
things have
living
already
thing.
changed in you from a second ago, right? So I'm sensing into. It's more the process of sensing into and the qualities of how we do the sensing into. Um, so yeah, so that's I think that's what happens with all these definitions, that the definitions get very confused in terms of it's a lot of them are my reaction to sensing into, right? The whole affective empathy, most of it is a large there's two parts of it. One is they're trying to describe the process of sensing into, that I'm sensing maybe your frustration about something or your excitement about something, and how those feelings get conveyed from you to me, that how I'm sensing those. And then the other part with affective empathy is the my reaction. And for me, the reaction part is pretty much, you could throw that out, is not part of the as part of empathy. But the thing is the reaction comes from the empathy part. So there is an empathic part to the reaction. Does that make sense? You
Um,
know what I'm saying? It's like,
I'm not
can I
fully
add
following.
something to that?
if I sense into your experience, I'm just bringing it into the model, the
Mhm.
affective cognitive empathy model, because that's what I've been trying to look at,
Mhm.
to describe that, is I'm sensing into your experience and maybe you're feeling frustrated, right? You're feeling a frustration about something. And I sense that frustration and or now maybe I'm sensing your curiosity, maybe a little confusion, right? I'm sensing that you have, and how do I sense, I sense it, and it's like do I become confused, right? Or for example,
Right.
through your feeling that I'm sensing into, do I have the feeling of confusion? Do I become totally confused, get lost in my confusion? So there's sort of that dynamic that they're trying to describe, and then they're describing the reaction. Like it's like maybe my reaction is, oh, you're feeling confused. I feel so sorry for you, right? The sympathetic, and then it becomes about me and my sympathy, or have distress, like, oh, I'm all worried and distressed about this personal distress, what they want to call empathic distress. So I don't know. Those are two. I'm just trying to describe what they're describing as affective empathy, and so
Yeah. And so you're
yes,
saying that the response or the reaction after you've sensed into another person
mm-hmm,
is not actually part of the empathy process.
right, uh-huh.
Did
And
I understand that
but when
correctly?
they're trying to describe that response, part of it was empathy to the person empathize. So there's actually empathy is mixed in there, but it's also mixed in with the response too. It
Right, right.
started, and then they might even stop your response. You might even stop empathizing and just get absorbed in your own response.
Hmm.
Mm.
So I don't,
What something occurred to me in thinking about AI and how I had a conversation with one tool saying, so you're not really responding. There is nobody responding here, right? And it wrote back, yes, you're right. All I do is choose the next word predictive from what you input. So it's like really nobody there. And that is something really strange to think about. You're talking to something, there is nobody there. But then something showed up in me that in the empathy circle, I see people, including myself, struggle sometimes with like, oh, how should I listen? How should I reflect? Am I good at this? And so on. I realized that to try to listen to somebody completely means that I suspend my inner process temporarily. And I become that wholeness if I can, and if we see this as a process, so I become more and more like almost like an impersonal reflection of you. And in that, there is this form of liberation because I could just really repeat what you say, and that wouldn't be wrong. It wouldn't be out of touch. It wouldn't be not empathetic to just repeat what you say because I just did the biggest act, which is suspend me in order to completely listen to you. And that to me is the empathetic act.
Yeah.
but the one thing with
It's
that
the act where I go
suspending,
like, I
mhm.
want to hear you completely so that, and I cannot do this if I'm too busy inside of myself.
The one thing with the suspending, sometimes that's seen as being neutral. What I would say is that we're not just suspending ourselves, we're bringing our empathy forward. You know what I'm saying? Right? When you're
Yes,
listening, so you're bringing your
yes.
empathy forward. It's not like you're just suspending yourself, your being.
No.
You're actually bringing a deeper part of yourself
Right.
forward. So, and it's not
Oh, that's
neutral.
beautiful. I
Yeah, it's not
love
a
that.
neutral approach. It's a very, it's a very active part. The other part too is, you know, we do have reactions, right? No matter what, there's going to be reactions coming up, but it's that the empathy sort of takes precedent, takes the biggest
Yes,
space, right? And then I kind of have those, and I just said, okay, well, I'm having a reaction. I'm feeling
yes,
sad
right.
about this. I'm feeling happy about it, but it doesn't kind of take up the empathic space. But then when it's my turn to be the speaker, then I can share, well, all these things came up for me. So I can have that self-empathy. We could say that that is you're sensing into yourself. You're having self-empathy into the feelings
Right.
that arise in you, and then you can share your feelings or thoughts with the other person. So
Yeah.
there's sort of that
I
dynamic
just
too.
want to say back what you said in the way I heard it. I am not suspending myself just because I do this because I have an intention. I have my intention is to be fully there for you, and that's what I'm giving.
And a
And
value
in
of it,
order to,
maybe. Mhm.
hmm?
A value of it too. Like I
Yeah,
value that I value that space, that the feeling of empathy. It's like I enjoy it. I value it. That warms my heart. That opens my
right.
soul. It expands, kind of expands me to.
Yes. And then you could say that the listening then goes both ways. I listen to you completely, and I also listen to me
Right. Uh-huh.
completely.
Yeah.
And if I do the same type of listening to myself that I do for you, I don't get involved into the reactions that come up in
Yeah.
me. I just
Yeah.
listen to what comes up in me, and then
hmm
I have actually most of the time, if it's honest and not judged, that's a little piece that's probably important to everybody in part of the conversation. The more we weave together, the more those reactions are also part
Of the
of the
whole,
weaving of
right?
our
hmm
connection of the whole. Yeah.
I was just
So
having a
the direction
conversation.
is this opening
hmm
is like this wider and wider space, I feel like, that's maintained. And it's also is like when that space is trying to be hijacked by emotions, by contractions and everything, then if I come from a definition of wholeness, holistic empathy, I recognize that and I say, no, I'm not going to go with that. I try to, I do my best to stay in that listening mode.
I'm sorry, I have to take a phone call from my husband. I think he's lost.
Okay, go for it. Yeah, so there's I think one of the benefits of that too is you have a bigger space of reference too,
Yes,
right? You have more insights, more you have a bigger space so when you make decisions, you're making it more of an inclusive decision
yes,
making process too, which it actually contributes to all the relationships of everyone and is gonna is going to reduce kind of frictions and conflict too.
yeah, that's why, I mean, what you're describing is really is a response to a culture that is essentially exactly the opposite right
hmm
now, in
Well, it's kind of
which
a
there,
mixture. Yeah, it's kind of a mixture of everything. There's a lot of empathy, I mean, you just meet people and there's a lot, but there's also
oh yeah, no, no,
more dysfunction and
yeah, I mean, in the political realm, like the narrative in our political discussion is not a narrative of inclusion, but a narrative of exclusion right now.
yeah.
That's
So
Hey,
I
I
look
gotta
at
go.
all.
oh, okay.
Sorry, I've got to go. My husband is hopelessly lost, so I
All
gotta
right,
go.
we'll pick up next week. Is that
Yes, we'll see you next week.
okay?
All
Thank you
right.
both.
All right.
Bye.
Yeah, so that's that the whole topic of competition versus empathy, power over, power with, that whole it's we're kind of looking at how society is sort of structured and I'm not quite sure what the solution is to the competition aspect, and empathy. I mean, you could say
Well,
that
we're
you
talking.
you empathize, everybody empathize with everyone else, and you decide, hey, competition is a good source, is a good energy. Let's have some competition, but there's still the overall space is an
Right,
empathic space, right? So,
right,
um,
right. So that would mean, like in our political discussion, not that one side or the other side is right, but that the conversation always includes all perspectives.
Yeah.
And that's our mandate, that we say we want to live in the world, not where my doctrine is lived or yours or anybody's, but in a world where all people are listened to and heard.
And structurally,
And
you could set it up where the different parties have empathy circles with each other, but there's regular empathy circles across the divide too, right? The
right,
politicians.
right,
So we have
right.
a structure. Empathy circles is a structure that can build that empathic energy, that empathic way of being. And I'm sure there's a lot of other structures. You know, you and Jody were talking about music, and there's all
Yeah,
kinds of other dance.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And um, that provides really that kind of this makes really sense, because like we're talking about a culture of empathy, not an ideology of empathy.
Mm-hmm,
And that's important distinction to me, because culture is made up not just by a body of word or a book, but it's also made up by the music and by the general attitudes and the small things, and all the different things that belong there. And it's also an answer to, I don't want to convince um, the other side to be like me. All I want to do is create a foundation for our connection that allows for all sides to be heard.
mm-hmm, yeah.
I don't want to push my doctrine onto you. I have ideas about life, but what do I know? I'm first of all, I'm not interested to have everything just like I want it.
But there is an aspect that if we want a empathic culture, how do we uh, bring that about in the sense that that is the structure that I'm advocating for. It's like I'm not advocating for just everybody do whatever they want. I'm advocating for an empathic structure, and
Yes,
usually, and a relationship, it's sort of an invitation to
yes,
others, and I'm willing to empathize first, right? It's like, okay, I'm willing
right.
to listen to you, to empathize with you and model the process. So,
Hmm.
attacking people, be it left or right, is not
Yeah,
helping. It's like
right.
listening to them and then saying, "Hey, I'm willing to listen first. Would you be like to have a mutually empathic relationship?" And quite often after people have been heard, they're more open to they're
Hmm.
listening, to you. And then, but then there's also like the legal system. There are structures that use force, right? And I think you kind of need that too. Like, you can't just that somebody who's committing a crime, they're forced to come into the legal system, and then so I kind of look at that question: what's the
Well, yeah.
relationship within a society of power? You know.
Well, um, there is um, like right now, especially in America, there's several examples that blatantly clear say that we're not an empathetic culture here, very clearly. When you have an election system that goes winner takes all, then that means I take my position and I force it onto everybody. I'm not listening to the other side because I don't have to. I live in a democracy that's defined by, if I win by just 1%, that's understood as a mandate that's 100%. And that's not empathetic. That
Mhm.
is not a reflection of an empathetic culture.
It seems
That's
if
very
what
simple.
I see is if we have a highly authoritarian, pure dictatorship and an empathic society, that there's sort of a spectrum. And I think
Yeah,
that democracy is trying to move towards a more empathic,
right.
so you divide the power, there's a division of power so that people have to talk to each other to negotiate. So, but, it can be, it is on the authoritarian sort of maybe direction, what a direction versus highly empathic. So I don't know, where it falls on that spectrum. I'm not.
Well, the trouble with a dualistic model like that, it would mean that empathy is on one side and authoritarianism or whatever it is on the other side. But that's where the confusion is. Then we can have an argument that we should have this or we should have that. I see empathy as being so if authoritarianism shows up in our world, the answer is to be empathetic with it,
Hmm.
even with that. Um,
But it's
and
still a
because
phenomenon. You're still using the term. Uh-huh.
authoritarianism works by 100% of the cases by excluding oftentimes very specific group from that empathetic view and use them as cannon fodder for whatever the political agenda or the war agenda that's going on. And so it's to begin divisive. And so I don't want to see empathy just sort of be like as an alternative model. No, we need to be so strong in our empathy culture that we can work through the sentiments that are generated through authoritarianism, particularly here in the United States. How come that people all of a sudden lean toward that? What's going on? Why is so hateful for other people? That's not going to be solved top down. That's going to be solved also by listening to them. But for that we got to get strong enough.
Yeah.
That's how I kind of look at it in a nutshell.
But it is still authoritarian. There's still a certain you need to be able to describe the
Yes,
approach, and then there is another approach, and so
right.
there
And
is sort
and
of
and
we have, we
in the judicial system, as you say, there is now almost in all states of America, in all the states in America, is a restorative justice option
hmm
offered for people. If they want to, they can go a different route. They can go not the punitive route, but they can go the restorative route, which
yeah,
means that the victim says, I want to know my perpetrator. I want to understand why they did what they did. I want to heal that no matter how difficult it is. And so that to me would be an expression of an empathetic culture
hmm
in the judicial system, and it's already existing.
yeah, and that would move towards the empathic side, the restorative
Yeah.
is how I would see it. I mean, there's going to be degrees, right, of an empathic
Right.
approach, and
Right.
that's moving in sort of that empathic direction.
Yeah, and I wonder a lot about that. How would a world look like that is sort of like at least 51% empathetic?
Hmm. Yeah.
Is that even possible? Or is there something like maybe we're in front of a massive evolutionary shift that, because I think we right now, we live in an overall global competitive culture. The doctrine of the globe right now is competition. And why am I saying that? Because we have the warning signs of global warming now for 50 years or longer. And or at least from the 70s on, we started knowing that there's something going on. We have not changed direction at all because just like with AI, the people even warned about the dangers of AI. And then in the backside, they invested everything they had into it because they're afraid to lose the competition. Because the overall doctrine of our world is whoever wins first will have the most. And so I don't know if that can gradually be turned back. I
I
kind of
think so.
doubt
I think
that.
that's where like the empathy circle comes in, if you're creating space for the dialogues to happen, it can be, we could say, if all families were using empathy circles, to have more empathic dialogues, if political parties had internal empathy circles and they had circles, you know, across the party lines. So it seems like it can be expanded. So it's a mindset that an approach. And
But I mean,
I think there is a lot of
there would be a
empathy.
moment though. There would be a moment though, because I just heard a speech of one of these guys in the town hall, very, very bright person speaking to the governor and says, Are you ever getting tired of always being part of the party that wants to prevent human good from happening? If it's Social Security, if it's Medicare, Medicaid, every good policy in this country you fought to the nth degree, and then finally you gave up when the culture shifted, and now you moved on to fight against the next perpetrators that you define, and you're always holding back history. So I feel like there is a need for a fundamental shift that sort of goes like, if you're a politician that only can divide people and you're not capable of keeping the people at the table and negotiate, then you're useless. You're not useful as a politician. You cannot exclude 50% of the people just simply because you feel like that. No, you're representing us. You got to listen to everybody.
Well, that's
And we
creating
don't have to.
social structures that support it. So we know that
Yeah.
the empathy circle creates a social structure that supports, and then can politics be redesigned to support a more empathic, and
Right.
I think that, democracy was an attempt to move in that direction,
Yeah,
and it,
totally. No, all
so
I'm saying is I just kind of think that there will be a moment where the whole world says, okay, we're done with this. We can't do this any longer
hmm
because it's destroying us. It literally is destroying us.
well, I think
And
that's what
what
we're
Naomi
offering.
Klein is
Yeah.
saying, what she observes and in the interviews she makes, that these rich, powerful people right now that are in power, they have no vision for the future. They're not talking about a positive humanity. All they talk about is extending their power to the nth degree. And ultimately, what that means is the destruction of our biosphere and of humanity. And they don't care. They just are on this automatic trajectory into more and more power, and they don't look, they don't consider. And so we got to stand up to that in a really big way. But I see, I've, this is my personal take, empathy circles are not small, they are huge. And what I do with my work, the seeding that we have done in the world is gigantic because
hmm
it's ultimately in partnership with nature and with where the planet wants to go. It is embedded in what Bill calls the universal empathetic field. That's not just human made. We're leaning into the nature of things, the nature of the cosmos. And it wants to shift into something else. Humanity has to. It has to become a cooperative species. There's even this scientist, Elizabeth Satturi. She's an evolutionary biologist, very big name in that realm. And she says every species first competes and then shifts into cooperation because it has to. And humanity hasn't done that step yet. We still are hungry and eating more and consuming more, and just that's what every species kind of does. And then it comes to a moment where it has to adjust, otherwise it will self-destruct. And we are in this moment, I think. And empathy circles are a major piece of that. That's my
Yeah, and I
view.
think that's what we need is you're talking about division, creating an alternative vision, and I think that's
Yes,
really our contribution,
yes,
is creating that vision. And part of that vision is to have clear definitions, and that's
yeah,
to say, to be able to differentiate the experience, because people get muddled in what empathy is. Like, we were
right,
talking about the sense of sensing into versus your reactions or your judgments and
right.
all that. And people, it seems to be they need a map, a mental map, as well as some tools and practices. Speaking
Yeah,
of
I
which,
agree.
a little bit different topic. I've been playing a lot with. Have you worked done anything with VO3?
No, let me just complete one thing
Okay.
here, Edwin. I think what's important in this attempt to define empathy, that we come out of this with something very simple, at least on the surface, that something like you are in your best empathy by just listening to somebody, and even if you just repeat back what they're saying,
Mm-hmm.
you are perfect in your empathy. That it doesn't become, sometimes I feel this in the circles, that people struggling with their reflection because they're now in this internal, I don't know, self-talk while they're reflecting. Am I doing this good? I should sense into the other person, but I don't feel anything. What should I say? Is he feeling that? Is he feeling this? And I get internally so busy, concerned about doing this the right way, that I lose touch with the simplicity of this. The simplicity has to be protected because our world is suffocating from complicated, endless pages of information, I feel like, it's really, really important,
Mm-hmm. Keep it
I call
simple.
this, yeah, we got to root it in simplicity
Mm-hmm.
so we can handle the craziness of the world.
It'd be a good topic for Empathy Summit talk about not getting what happens when you get all wrapped up in your own thoughts and anxieties and so forth, and how to keep it simple. Yeah. And
I would
how do you
love to
keep it
talk about that.
simple? That'd be a good topic. Um, there's I did, if you're wanting to play around,
Sure.
VO3, you can sign up for a 1 month
Yeah,
trial.
the Gemini Pro trial. Yeah, I'll do that today.
Oh, and like here's I made, like, for example, this is a video I just made. Um, so this is Jesus, Buddha, Confucius, and Krishna, and they're in an empathy circle up in the mountains. And here, let me see how the volume is on this. Yeah.
Empathy circles are better than enlightenment,
better than heaven,
more divine than the music of my flute. Empathy circles are.
Anyway, I'm just kind of playing around, so.
It's just fun, yeah.
Buddha says, I don't know if you heard of it, empathy circles are better than enlightenment and Jesus, and they all kind of say better than heaven. And then that's Krishna, he's got the magic flute. I don't know if you know.
Right, right, right.
And it's better
Better
than
than my
the
flute. I love it.
So,
Yeah, I heard the back end of the conversation, and I somewhat agree with the sort of the cautiousness that I heard there.
hmm
But I also, I've done a bunch of things in my life where I knew this is not going to sit well with the people. It's going to
hmm
stir up some stuff. And I said, okay, let them come at me.
right.
Then I can talk to them about it. And that opens up a conversation. That's how I feel, how you kind of approach it. You
That's it. I
poking
have
in
fun
many
with it
directions.
too. And let's
Let
get
them
the,
react to it.
right.
We can handle it.
Did you hear the
I like
audio?
that.
Were you hearing the audio? Okay.
Yes, I was.
Oh,
Yeah.
because here's another one I'm wanting to, this is,
If only
Oh,
humanity had valued mutual empathy.
Yeah, they would still be around, like us.
If only humanity had valued.
yeah. And then I'm making a little thing that there's that humanity, at least this version of humanity, has gone to hell, like has blown itself up. And then I want to, then go from the future, this possible, humanity has killed itself, to the present where people are against empathy, and then the alternative, like a discussion. Do we go empathic and not? And part of that first scene is this. This is the other part is after the robots, there's an overview of the flyover of the city, and then this uh, robot.
They had a choice. They didn't choose well.
You still have a choice. Choose wisely.
So,
They had a choice.
Yeah.
so it's like you've got a choice, choose wisely. And then, I go into a scene going to the modern times, the preacher against empathy. And,
Yeah.
you
Yeah, yeah,
know,
yeah. Right,
you
right.
saw
Yeah.
those, but then the
Okay.
counter, and then a dialogue between them, and then the preacher joins the empathy circle. So I'm trying to make something like that. So I'm open to any sort of ideas. It could be a little, we got 8 seconds for a little 8 second, promotional piece, something like the Buddha one. That's like a separate piece, could just be posted.
Yeah.
And I did put the ones of, the um so if you have any ideas, glad to.
Let me think about that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you just got to
So
kind
you're
of
making
brainstorm.
sort of, so the idea is, yeah, yeah, that's a new one.
Empathy circles are a great way to listen to each other, and we use them for conflict resolution. Come and join us.
Yes, I
Mhm.
have two of those, one with the gorilla and one with the
Right,
pansies. So yeah.
right. So the idea is, yeah, I get it. I get it. So if this keeps going, then we end up here, but we could make a different choice, and we still have that choice right now. And then
Hmm.
also create a little bit of a vision. I think I've asked that question in a lot of different environmental groups. I asked when it came to like a feedback session, I asked, so where are we going? And because I hear a lot of criticism of where we at, but so where are we going? Is anybody really talking about that? And it's surprising, like even in the movie world, we have this was like a post on Substack. Somebody wrote about that, saying that both in the animated and in the featured movies kind of thing, we have about in the last, I don't know what this time span, 30 years, 40 years, whatever, movies, 85% of the movies are dystopian, or
Hmm.
90%. There's hardly any utopian
Yeah.
movie beside of Star Trek and those where it's not even, it's just mentioned that society has shifted into a global society and that there's no more war on the world and so on. That's the context for Star Trek, and that was early on. It's a while ago when they started that. Nobody dares to go there anymore, and that's weird. It is
Yeah.
really weird to think about that. We talk about a million things, but we're not talking about the future much.
Yeah. Or
And
a positive, how do you get there in a positive way? Yeah.
Ezra Klein could become a person for us. He wrote the book Abundance and just released it. And he's one of the few people who talks about, what could we do with the money we have in this world today? How could it look like? Desalinization everywhere. And like all these possibilities that right now are available to us, but we're not doing them. So
Yeah.
and
Well, that's what we're
for
trying to do, is
that,
that positive vision. So,
yes,
mm.
the
And
and I
then,
and I see empathy almost like the circles as the viral spear tip
hmm,
into humanity.
yeah.
Now we have to be very careful with what spins out of that. Right now, I'm dealing with this thing with Mike Wachara in Africa, and I have to be very sensitive to this whole situation. It's not easy, but I think ultimately it doesn't stay in the empathy circle. It's got to go somewhere. And that's something we really need to talk about, because if we don't create that vision, I doubt that we grow much. The more the definition of empathy, and out of that, the culture that we project from that,
Well, that's sort of
the
the
more
building the
needs, the
core.
more
Yeah. Hmm.
the more body we give to that, the
Yeah.
better. It
I
has
think
to
we need a
be.
good foundation. I think that's the
Yes.
purpose of the definition is that here's the basic foundation. We've got some basic practices, and how do we then flesh out that basic? So at least we have a good kernel. And I think just having people listen to each other and dialogue with each other is just the core, you know.
And
So,
there's one thing that has come up for me at times a little bit. I don't know if you see this sometimes, but one time when I shared Carl Rogers' definition, where he uses the word without any material mixed in from you,
hmm.
right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hmm.
Somebody had an issue with that. And she was saying, I have to have my guards up for male toxicity, or, or I have an agenda that I bring into my listening because that makes sense to me. And to me, that's a little troublesome.
Hmm.
Not that I'm like super alarmed by it, but that I see as a potential. We had this sometimes. The first training I attended to, people started talking about how you should talk when you share in the circle. That we should develop a catalog of
Hmm.
guidelines of
Right.
how to share, and so that there is in the background sort of something that I would feel is infringing on this whole holistic definition of empathy, where it wants to sort of put in some gender sensitive or with good intention. I understand, but
Yeah, I've resisted that too. Just made it really clear that it's free speech is at the core. So,
yes.
um, you see that we were talking about in the previous meeting, just how sort of woke ideology has taken over NVC. Just that person I interviewed, Alan Rawls, he
Hmm.
was in he was started with active listening with Gene Genlin in the early 70s when he was a student, and he was like friends with, Marshall Rosenberg. And he was saying he was with Marshall Rosenberg before he even had the concept of needs, right? So it was like a newer concept. But he said in NVC that there's a sort of the woke ideology, victims, we have to help the victims, and it becomes a sort of an us and them
Hmm.
you're against racism, against the patriarchy, against, all this. And he said that group has actually they've been voted in to the board. So the board now is sort of a woke oriented group. And I've seen conflicts. Like over 5 years ago, I even mediated a conflict between someone who wanted more the empathic approach versus this sort of woke, for ideology. And so it's been
Hmm.
a term, and he's in the empathic, I would say, the more pure empathy approach. And he's very dismayed by what's happening with NVC that's sort of gone woke. And I offered to hold some empathy circles on the topic if he wanted to have a dialogue about it, which I think is the way to approach it. So anyway, it's a little bit
Yeah,
what
like,
you're talking. That person is in that sort of woke. We have the enemies
yeah,
of the patriarchy. Racism is the enemy.
yeah.
Colonialism is the enemy. All these people are the enemy, and we have to fight the power versus, we want to bring those people into an empathic mindset. And the way to do it is to model our empathy towards them. And then, so there's a, there's a, and then there's actually I did in that conference, there was um, a person who was talking about radical empathy, and it's kind of what they're trying to take empathy into a woke mindset. And this was a chart she had about traditional empathy, conventional empathy versus radical empathy, which I would say is a woke empathy. And that's what that interview I did with Kevin, Waltman, was about. He's on the side seeing this so-called radical empathy and was kind of battling. So it's a dynamic that is out there. So you can see how she was breaking it down, for. So it's again, that's why the definition, I think, is important and to be able to address those.
Yeah, you see, this is that's why I feel words will ultimately fail. Because we can discuss this until the cows come home. This creates distinctions between things that, yeah, you can make those distinctions, but all you're going to do is create a split in our mind. Conventional empathy versus radical empathy. You can see how this struggle supports the status quo unintentionally. Well, I would, I have issue with that.
Right, me too. It's not the status quo. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, so you describe what another person shares from their heart as the status quo, and I'm not supposed to listen to it. I'm not, if I don't have a filter that judges what they say, I'm supporting the status quo. What are you talking about? This is very limited.
Yeah.
And it's
But
very, that's the problem with wokeism. And I can so clearly see how these political camps always balance each other. They can't. One goes into this direction too much. That means they got to go into that direction too much.
Yeah.
That's why we're always at 50-50, because nobody is making a step into the wholeness where
Right.
they're saying, wait a second, we got to listen to all people and we got to govern for all people. That's our mandate,
Yeah.
I don't get it. Or like the socialistic movement is now about speaking right, and you completely forgot that it is about economic equality. You completely abandoned the core of socialism. What are you doing? I don't get it.
Yeah.
It's empty. It's
So these are
everything
all
is.
things that need to be addressed and,
Yes.
and create good explanations. And I think again, we have the empathy circle. So it's like bring the woke in, bring the anti-woke,
Yes.
bring them all in. You're all welcome
Bring
to
them
have
all
your
in.
time.
If
So,
they're willing to show up, right? That's
yeah,
the
that's the
hardest
thing
thing.
is will they show up or not? That's the other thing. Probably better quit. I've been at it for 2.5 hours. My butt's hurting.
Right.
So,
Right. So before I make any steps with that donation thing, I shared some things with Ingrid, and I don't know. We can talk about it some other time when you have some time. Maybe we should
I can
have a
reach out
separate
to.
meeting for that.